El frente ucraniano colapsa.
The Ukrainian front is collapsing. Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Vovchansk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhia. Russia is making advances along the entire combat front at an ever-increasing pace. Meanwhile, casualties and desertions in the Ukrainian armed forces are reaching record levels. To make matters worse, Russian airstrikes against critical Ukrainian infrastructure are wreaking havoc in the rear. At this rate, Ukraine could capitulate within a few months. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from Berlin, Germany. We begin live broadcast number 291 of Demolishing Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and remember to help us with a thumbs up against censorship, as well as with a free subscription or likewise paid memberships, or through our PayPal account. Any help is always welcome. And with that said, I finally introduce Mr. Fernando Moragón from Madrid, Spain. Fernando, how are things over there?
Desde Madrid, España. Fernando, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Bueno, a ver, hemos pasado aquí de una situación
Well, let's see, we've gone from an absolutely unexpected situation here. Last Wednesday we had a high of 24 degrees, which is exceptional for November, and now we've gone back, or rather, we've entered November's normal weather. We've gone from 24 to today's 14 degrees. And you can feel it, of course you can. Not that cold, to be fair. Not like what the Ukrainians are going to face this winter, because they really are going to be cold, seriously cold. And now we'll get into the details because, well, the situation is dramatic. And of course the Russians keep bombing. I mean, with each passing day, the situation, both in terms of gas and electricity, gets worse, not better.
Not as cold as it is here in Germany, Fernando. A week after my return, I already have a cold. Ah, well, the pharmacy right in front of me, at my disposal, the medicine, well, the tissues, and I'm already sick. But by the way, Fernando, I must, or should I, present an exclusive piece of news, the final confirmation. And Fernando must, in this regard, make a confession in front of the cameras. Finally, after so much back and forth, so many rumors, so many press reports, it's confirmed, Mr. Fernando Moragón has been infiltrated. Mr. Fernando Moragón is an infiltrator, ladies and gentlemen. Fernando, I want your confession, please.
Let's be honest, things are what they are. And at this point, I'm just waiting for the police to show up at my house any moment now because, yes, I'm infiltrated. It's a peculiar kind of infiltration, but in the end, it's still infiltration.
What do you mean? Not a Russian infiltration, Fernando?
Let's see, the doctor who gave me the shot doesn't look Russian. I'd say he seemed more Spanish. But anyway, yes, in the foot, they gave me an injection in the foot because it's in terrible shape. So now I can finally say I've been infiltrated. Well, infiltrated in the foot. And he doesn't look Russian, but next time I'll ask him. Who knows?
So many intelligence service investigations, and finally,
the truth, in the open, Fernando Moragón. The truth always comes out. Indeed, the truth always comes to light. Finally, I'm infiltrated. What can you do? Anyway. But well, when it comes to infiltrators, the Europeans take the prize. They're the real infiltrated ones, but in the brain.
All right, let's drop the joking around and the nonsense, dear Fernando, and start analyzing a situation that's become unsustainable for Ukraine. Where would you like to begin, Fernando?
Which area of the... Well, let's see, we'll start from the north and leave the big stuff, the major fireworks, so to speak, for the end. That's where everything is happening, really. You can hear me, and all that. Well, it has to be said that if we look at Sumy, there aren't any major movements. The bombing continues and all that. But there haven't been significant advances, partly because the Ukrainians had to withdraw units from there after carrying out a series of counterattacks that allowed them to retake some positions. But they had to stop, because they needed to move those units to other areas, including Pokrovsk, the now famous Pokrovsk, which we'll get to later. And here we can see indeed how they're pounding each other. In Sumy, as I said, little movement. The front is quite static, although the bombing continues without issue. But it's always a point to keep in mind, and let's not forget that from where the Russians are to Sumy city, there's very little distance. I mean, at any moment, they can redirect their forces depending on how the situation develops in each sector of the front, because that's kind of the key.
25 kilometers, according to this measuring tool. 25 kilometers, Fernando.
Right, that's it. I mean, as you can see, a situation with fewer troops there in Sumy, if they had to be withdrawn for any reason to other areas or sectors of the front, would make it possible for the Russians to decide to advance, to put pressure so that once again the troops would have to move and prevent such an important city as Sumy from falling. It's a big city, but we're not talking about one the size of course, Kiev or Kharkiv or anything like that. So, well, we have that on standby, meaning it's there latent, depending on what happens this winter, which is going to be quite eventful. And then we have this bit by bit here. Well, in Vovchansk, what's left, there it is nothing. I mean, they took an area here, which is what it says here. I'm not great with these names. There's an area right where my big head is, underneath, there, around here. This one, Sinelnik or something like that. That's unlikely.
Here, there.
Well, so that's it. It's no longer strictly Vovchansk. Well, they took this area, and as we can see, only this small part of Vovchansk remains here. That is the urban area, which appears in green, well, yellowish green, something like that. And that's it. And the soldiers themselves who are there, the commanders themselves, say that it's unsustainable, that it's a city that's been devastated because fighting has been going on for a long time, and they don't even have those, what are they called? I can't remember the name right now. The dragon's teeth to stop the advance. No. The basements. The basements. There are no basements here. I mean, the houses, both individual ones and apartment buildings in the former Soviet Union, all have basements. So this is so devastated that even the basements are no longer available because they're completely destroyed. That is to say, they have nowhere to take shelter, and this, well, one last push, and that will be it. From here on, progress will continue through the areas around Vovchansk. And well, it's worrying because more and more territory controlled in Kharkiv is being lost. In Kharkiv, to the Russians, in fact, Ukrainian military officials admitted that the well-known destruction of a dam located within the Russian-controlled area, which the Ukrainians blew up, had to some extent slowed the Russian advance, but it had also harmed them because they had flooded their own positions. That is to say, so well. And then we have here, in this area of Kharkiv, in Dobroshina, here, well, everything in gray has already been taken by the Russians. This is confirmed imagery. They're advancing week by week, a small area, but the idea is that this place labeled Dobroshinskaya or Dobroshanskaya is almost surrounded and it's going to fall. They're going to do it as always, the same way, encirclements. That is very clear encirclements, always the Russian tactic, which they learned after several monumental mistakes they made at the beginning of the war with frontal attacks. And no, not anymore. Now it's encirclements and waiting. That is, not much more is needed. Well, that's how it is. They keep advancing, and they're creating an important sector that once Kupiansk, which is further down, is taken, they could decide to move forward through here. And once again, we'd see the Ukrainians having to move troops to keep this from becoming a disaster. But this is something we're seeing and will continue to see throughout this winter. The lack of personnel, the lack of men, means that troops are constantly being moved, and the Russians take advantage of the areas the Ukrainian troops leave empty to reinforce sectors that are in crisis. So they take advantage of that moment to move into those areas and create a new crisis situation that will once again force the Ukrainians to move. And so, wearing them down, although some sectors, as we'll later see in the south, in Dnipro and Zaporizhia, have nothing left, there what remains are scattered units and little else. Here in Kupiansk, there's been a last-minute attempt, there are significant Ukrainian counterattacks, and there's been an attempt in this more elongated area here to narrow, to cut off, with Ukrainians attacking from both sides, from both sectors, that is, from the west, the western part of the siege, and from the eastern part trying to make a cut there. But it seems it didn't go well for them. And well, as we said before, little by little they're gaining ground, practically replicating that advance on both banks. What happens is that if you look closely, zoom in here, you can more or less make out that the eastern part still continues. A series of roads, a series of, there we see them, urban or semi-urban, industrial areas and so on, that eventually reach the south of this whole zone. But what is indeed, as they point out here, this part is practically taken. Almost all of Kupiansk is gone, and last week they were already talking about 75% of the city, so practically nothing left. Let's see how long they can hold out. Because what? That's another thing. What exactly are Zelensky and company doing? Well, by denying the obvious, saying no. Well, this is, no, Kupiansk still has a lot of fight left, a lot to give. And in the end, giving the order, in all the problematic and important places for publicity and political reasons, not military ones, to hold on until the end. Well, from a military point of view, it makes no sense, but they don't want, let's say, the news to come out that Kupiansk has fallen and that the Kupiansk encirclement has collapsed and so on, whatever. No, same with Pokrovsk. They keep denying what's happening in Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians. They keep saying, no, things are under control.
Here, this image is very good, Fernando, as a demonstration of the terrain in this area of the delta, this swampy zone on the banks of the Oskil River, if I remember correctly. By the way, Russia here, in the area of the city, managed to capture both banks. But anyway, just to recall the conditions and why the encircled Ukrainian soldiers can't easily leave this pocket. Here's a video that very clearly shows the geography of this swampy area, of this delta, right? This is just one of the branches. Pay attention to that. Basically a swampy area. There's barely a crossing there.
It's reinforced because we're in the rainy season. I mean, there's more mud, more swamp than usual at other times of the year.
How many vehicles destroyed, Fernando? One on the left?
4.
And over there, far away, to the right? Also on the other bank? Also on the other side of the river? Several there too.
And we've seen that most, not all, but most of the destroyed vehicles are, let's say, regular cars, because both Ukrainians and Russians prefer to move around in cars, as we've mentioned before, rather than in armored vehicles, which are completely obsolete. It actually makes me laugh, because when you see here in Ukraine how the armored personnel carriers and all kinds of vehicles, look at them running away.
It's the best example, isn't it?
Of course, I mean, they're completely obsolete. In Europe, they're now placing orders left and right for armored vehicles, for tanks, when it's becoming clear that those are a thing of the past, that they no longer make sense. And well, as you could see in that video with a car, if you see the drone coming, you have a better chance of opening the door. Some don't even have doors, so it's easier to jump out and run. In an armored vehicle, forget it. Besides, with a car, you have greater speed, and ultimately you can take your chances by swerving to dodge. In an armored vehicle, forget it. So as I said, completely obsolete. And this war is changing what we understood wars to be at a dizzying speed. It's showing that right now Europe and the United States as well are not prepared for a war like the one in Ukraine. I mean, if they had to go in and fight, which they're not going to do, they would have very serious problems. Because they have an army, or armies, mainly prepared for asymmetric wars. And where before you could send armored vehicles, like in Iraq for example, without major issues because your opponent didn't have the firepower to take out your Abrams. Here we've seen what the Abrams are good for, just another tank, in a war where tanks are no longer a key element. In other words, while these guys are fighting a war that's practically from the future, the Europeans and Americans are still stuck in asymmetric wars, if not in World War II, thinking they can carry out deep offensives. We have to forget about this. I mean, and then from here we basically go down to the Imam, where little by little they start getting closer. The Imam will take more effort, that's where we are. The Imam will take more effort because it's a bigger city, because, well, it's strategic for many sectors. And, well, little by little they're making progress. But they are making progress. And we can see this, as I said before, in many places. They're moving forward, but they take advantage of the situation at each point. If they see here that there's some resistance, or that it's not worth the risk to move forward too quickly, they'll just keep advancing calmly. And they're going to wait for the right moment, when for whatever reason, in Lyman the defenses, and above all the troops, the soldiers, are fewer in order to strike. That's what we're seeing. We'll look at it more closely later. That's what we're seeing down there, as I said, in Zaporizhia. This will end up falling this winter, I have no doubt about it. And what is already very, very surrounded is Siversk. Siversk, this week, is practically encircled, meaning it's trapped. And I think, in fact, there are already units starting to probe the city of Siversk itself. The only thing left is to take a small settlement. We have the video there. A small settlement south of Siversk, which is almost attached to Siversk, and then they would begin to assault it. At any moment, they're going to start assaulting it because, as I said, it's already practically completely surrounded from the north, from the east, and almost from the south. That's what was missing, as you pointed out there. And Siversk, at any moment, we can see they're starting to move in. And as I said, Siversk is a small city and very hard to defend, so it would fall soon. Now let's move further south. And further south, we have Konstantinovka, though I can never remember how to say it. Actually, the translation would be something like Constantinople. That's what Konstantinovka means. Anyway, let's not forget that Russia is the third Rome. That is Rome, Constantinople, and Moscow, the third Rome. That's why, I suppose during the time of the Tsars, they went around naming places Konstantinovka, Constantinople. It's sinister. But anyway, this is a serious problem, it has to be said. It's a serious problem we have, even if we focus on this, because apart from the difficulty of pronouncing many of these names, the names are repeated like 30 times. I mean, there's no town that, for example, well, you've got as many Veseles as you want, and in the end, you don't know which Veseles you're talking about.
And like this, in this case, apparently Fernando, it's Konstantinivka in Ukrainian and Konstantinovka in Russian. Those differences between that's another one.
That is, on top of everything, you have to deal with two names for everything. Because Prokhorov is in Ukrainian and Dimitrovka or something like that, I don't even remember. No, not Dimitrovka, that's Miednograd. Konstantin something or other is the Russian one. Honestly, no more complexity, please. Simplify, pick one, I don't care which, but it can't be both.
Well, so here, they come in through the south.
Yes.
And the last thing is that they were a piece of news that was barely reported.
Yes, because right now everything is focused on the southernmost part of the front. They're pushing through here, Ivanopilia or something like that, a small town that they've practically almost taken. That is, in the gray zone, there it is, in Ivanopilia, that one right there. Well, as you can see, that one is practically almost taken, and once they finish with this town, they'll join the assault from the south or southeast toward Konstantinivka. Also, they're starting to advance on the other side of the reservoir, the well-known reservoir. Well, this reservoir is taken by the Russians. I mean, we can see the reservoir in green there, but it's not shown here. But this is in Russian hands, it should be marked in red. And now in this area, as you can see in the gray zone, they're starting to advance there as well. So, well, this is going to take more time. It's a big city, as I said, and this will take time, but maybe it'll fall this winter. I mean, the thing is, right now, it's not a priority. That is, at the moment, where the front is collapsing and where the Ukrainians are having a lot of problems is in the south. And that's where the Russians are focusing, logically.
Fernando, here in Konstantinivka, we see the first step toward the Kramatorsk and Sloviansk axis, right? It's the last major defensive line of Donetsk, an entire urban area heavily fortified since 2014.
In the end, all of this, from what was before Konstantinivka, Torsky, and so on, all the way up, is one city after another. There's almost no, as you move forward, what's in between isn't even a kilometer of open ground. So it's a huge conurbation, and it's proving extremely difficult to assault. And on top of that, you still have Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which are enormous. Look how it rises up here. Well, of course, this is the hardest part. Look, I understand the mandate, let's say, of prioritizing the liberation of Luhansk and Donetsk. But I think that doing what the Russians did and are still doing, which is the hardest thing, meaning the most heavily fortified area of all, well, going about conquering it, as we've already seen, they've been at it for 4 years now. That is, conquering step by step, fortification by fortification. When I think that, to collapse the Russian front, they could have made much better use. What happened is they didn't react quickly enough of the areas where they were advancing more easily. For example, let's not forget Kherson. When the special military operation began, it was taken in a single day, all of Kherson. Those advances reached as far as Mykolaiv, which was semi-encircled, and they were also relatively close to Kryvyi Rih. In other words, they had a relatively solid line of advance there, and they didn't face the same difficulties they've had in Luhansk, and above all, in Donetsk. Well, I suppose those were political considerations rather than strictly military ones. But anyway, that's what the Russians decided. Just as the issue has always been widely debated. And deep down, even Putin has acknowledged it, that is, and Zhirinovsky too, deep down. It was a very clear mistake at the moment when, in 2014, after the Euromaidan coup d'etat in February 2014, and after Poroshenko began to crack down on Russian speakers and then on those in Donetsk and Luhansk. In short, many mistakes were made there, and above all, once you decide to occupy Crimea, well, that is to say, the Russians should have liberated Donetsk and Luhansk. Let's not forget that a city like Mariupol was at the mercy of the troops of the two Donbass republics, Luhansk and Donetsk. It was at their mercy. They were entering. The Europeans had already withdrawn. Well, later we saw what it cost. By the way, it's very important to compare. Look how the truth has changed. In 2022, the siege of Mariupol, it was taken by storm. This is no longer done. Encirclements, advances, and when the enemy's position is already badly deteriorated, they begin to move in. Another key difference, Mariupol. Thousands of soldiers fighting each other. In fact, 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers were captured in the end, once it was taken. Now they're talking about this, but in this case it was taken by hundreds of soldiers, not thousands, hundreds. And there's a logic to that, which I'll try to explain. That is, in the current situation of drone warfare, which didn't exist in 2022 with this level of quality and quantity, the main deployment of troops isn't in the cities you assault or defend, but one step back, where all your logistics are and where your drone operators are defending or attacking. As a result, conquests are carried out by introducing very few units because there are few defenders. I mean, that's why we can see that even in the case of Petrov, it's possible that when they moved in further, well, when they assaulted the city, there may not have been more than 400 or 500 men. But it's not because what we're seeing is that before, to take a building, maybe 15, 20, or 30 soldiers would go in and face another 30. Now to take a building, 2 go in and 2 defend it. In other words, this change is radical and fundamental.
Sorry for interrupting you. Speaking of changes in the war, we just showed a video comparing the advantages of a conventional car over a tank. Here it's the opposite. Pay attention to what happened with this tank in the area. Obviously, this was in Kramatorsk, if I remember correctly. Sorry, in Kostiantynivka, my mistake. In Kostiantynivka. Notice how easily a drone costing maybe 2,000, 3,000 or 5,000 euros can disable it. First one, the impact might have met some resistance.
Look here. I'm not sure if it was very clear there. The skill, right there. If you freeze the frame, notice the skill of the drone operators. They know perfectly well which parts of an armored vehicle are the weakest, and specifically those of a tank. One of the weakest parts is where the turret rotates, that is, the intersection between the chassis and the rotating turret. Well, that intersection is exactly where the drone is going in, right there, in that image.
In the first one, obviously he wanted that, but he couldn't, right? Hit a bit on the side, that's why the tank was able to resist. But look there, it's that. And from that point on, one after another, until destruction. What's the value of a tank, Fernando? What is this, a T-70? At least, well, we're talking, I don't know exactly, but $3 or $4 million for sure, right?
Yes, more. I mean, with the technology they carry. This already, look, tanks already come with built-in computer technology, automatic firing systems, and so on, which makes costs skyrocket. No, of course. That's what we're talking about. I mean, we saw it, I think it was last week. For example, the famous Shaheds, the Geranium 2s, which we all know, that the Russians are already producing like crazy. Well, these, depending on the type of geranium, whether it's a Geranium 2, 93, and so on, with different variants, can cost at most around $30,000 per unit, if I remember correctly. The Chinese, the Chinese are making them for 10,000. In fact, they just made a Chinese version of the geranium. And that particular company, because it has many, was commissioned, if I remember correctly, to produce 3 million units. Like what? It's like making candy. Send me 3 million candies, right? Send me 3 million of... Honestly, does anyone think this shows how out of touch with reality Europeans are? Well, the Americans a bit less, but still. I mean, does anyone really think that with China's industrial backing, Russia could lose? It's insane. With China's industrial capacity to manufacture whatever it wants. The other day, for example, out of the 2,000 videos you can find, there was one about BYD. Yes, the car company, which I can never quite remember well. BYD. They're building a factory that's basically a city. I mean, for who knows how many people. In fact, the factory, I don't remember how many hectares it covers. 400 or 500 hectares, something huge. I mean, because they're starting to produce, I don't remember exactly, maybe 1.5 million cars a year or something like that. Those mind-boggling numbers. So, of course, right now, let's not kid ourselves. It doesn't matter what the GDP says. It doesn't matter what the official data shown to us in the West says. China is already the world's leading economic power, ahead of the United States. And above all, without a doubt, it's the leading industrial power. The industrial production capacity that China has is something the United States doesn't have. Not by a long shot. Plain and simple. Not even in tech. And look, just to make a small digression, that famous video that was made of Jensen Huang, I never remember, the CEO of NVIDIA. I mean, the big boss who looks Asian, and if his name is Huang, well, obviously, and he looks Chinese, then he must be Chinese.
Chinese or American, but Chinese. Taiwanese, if I remember correctly.
Taiwanese, well, after all. And this man was saying it. The United States is going to lose the race for artificial intelligence. That's what the CEO of NVIDIA says, meaning the major global microchip manufacturer, the most valuable company in the world, or at least on the Wall Street Stock Exchange. I mean...
And besides, Fernando, yet another comparative advantage of China. Before long, we're going to witness the bursting of the artificial intelligence bubble, just like we once witnessed the bursting of the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, as they called it. This by no means implies that artificial intelligence isn't bringing changes to people's lives, to the way work is created, to the way production happens. No, no, no. In the same way that the bursting of the dot-com bubble didn't mean the disappearance of the internet. On the contrary, we now seem even more connected through the internet. That doesn't go away. The revolutionary nature of this technical change, but the big companies that are making a completely fictitious, speculative bet on artificial intelligence are going to disappear. The biggest AI companies now, like OpenAI, Elon Musk's, Apple's, Microsoft's, well, basically all of them, with huge amounts of money invested without any return, without any profit from it, and with no prospect of profit. So they create a bubble, and at some point, ping, just like in the stock market, because ultimately it's the same thing, a bubble, a speculative explosion, and at some point, boom, everything goes to hell. Pardon the expression.
La mierda con el perdón de la expresión, y los chinos en este sentido presentan una ventaja.
And the Chinese, in this sense, have an advantage, because remember that when these bubbles start in China, the Chinese government, in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, decides, ping, that's it. And the companies are nationalized or cleaned up, the big businessmen in charge end up in jail, and the productive cycle is reactivated, which is what really matters. Like in the case of the real estate bubble in China with Evergrande, they quickly restarted housing production and cleaned up that famous real estate company, which also had a speculative bubble, went bankrupt, and was then put back into operation. That's China's big advantage over the United States.
And indeed, besides the fact that the Chinese are competing and beating the North Americans, The Americans, they're competing against them. What are the Americans doing? Subsidizing their companies. The government has to step in because they can't compete. That is, Mr. Trump has to come out saying, we're going to create this Stargate thing or whatever, $500 billion backed by the state and so on. In the end, I say this half jokingly, but there's some truth to it. It turns out that the statists, the socialists, are going to be the Americans and the Europeans, and the communists are the complete opposite. Well, the thing is, just look at how far they're going. I mean, they're taking this seriously as a technological and productive development activity, to the point that they've already included in the latest 5-year plan, which was approved and all that, an education reform in which, starting, I don't know, maybe next school year or something like that, from around the age of 8 or so, all kids will have a subject, just like math, history, or language, a subject that will be artificial intelligence, but not optional, mandatory. They'll have to pass it just like math, language, and the rest. That is to say, this means that in a few years they'll have, well, 100 million, or who knows how many Chinese people who, as they grow up, will have grown up with artificial intelligence embedded in their minds, in the sense that they'll know everything. In other words, they've made a very clear bet, just as they once did, and we're seeing the results now, when they invested in engineers, in all kinds of engineering, from industrial engineering to computer engineering, and in scientific fields as well. Now they're making a specific bet in favor of artificial intelligence. They've created, and already have, degree programs, not in computer science, no, specific programs solely and exclusively in artificial intelligence, offering both undergraduate and doctoral degrees. I mean, it's a commitment that goes from the educational level to all the industries that are now rapidly integrating artificial intelligence, because they know it's a competitive element that helps them. Because here we have to distinguish first the companies that can use it and that it provides added value to, and then the majority of personal uses, which are for silly things, let's be honest. I have a bunch of friends who are into the ChatGPT craze and all that, and what do they use it for? Well, for silly things. I mean, you're not going to fool me. Tell me, make me a little drawing about so-and-so. Well, fine, but that... Let's move on. Let's move on.
We need to begin the analysis of the front. Dear Fernando Moragón.
Let's take a step forward, literally and figuratively.
Indeed.
Exactly. Well, let's go to Pokrovsk now. The situation, well, I'm not going to curse it. What we can say is that it's already confirmed by several sources that, let's see, we have to say the encirclement is complete. I mean, in what's left here, this area that they don't usually mark in red for some reason, that's closed off. It's sealed with drones, sealed with artillery, and if they want, they can send someone to patrol or more, but it doesn't make sense. It's closed, meaning no one's getting out that way. In fact, what we have now is a total pocket. No one's getting out of there. That's the first thing. Second, we're seeing, and we'll look at it now, how the so-called pig farms are laid out here. There are pig farms. Well, those have already been taken. The farms are around here. There, look at them. Well, you can see it there a bit in red. It's just that it's covered by the red color. Those 2 pig farms are occupied, and they're advancing in this direction, which means they're pushing the Ukrainians back, and above all, the drone operators who are key to what would be the encircled area. And this part is also important because from, look, this gray area we have here, toward Jin's, probably mispronounced. This gray area shows that they're advancing along the road, the famous M30 or F50 highway, depending on how you look at it. So they're moving forward and already starting to probe, because the next step the Russians will take is to capture Ginza. But already, I mean, as I said, they're probing it and above all advancing from the southeastern side to cover this whole area. This part that's in gray, not gray anymore, should be red, and in the end it's the same thing, an encirclement.
Y al final hace lo mismo, un envolvimiento. Es que siempre hacen la misma táctica. Bueno,
They always use the same tactic. Well, they're already out there. I mean, I think they've even taken a few houses on the outskirts, so they're already advancing westward. As for Minigrad, the latest news is that the south is practically conquered. That is, if we consider this gray area, which is actually red, we can see that there's very little left in the south. Also, since Minigrad has a rather odd shape, it's as if we imagined a set of dumbbells, a wide area, a narrow area, and another wide area to the south.
Una zona estrechita y otra zona amplia al sur. Bueno, pues la zona del sur está prácticamente.
Well, the southern area is practically finished, and what remains, basically, is the northern area. This part here, they're moving, as I said, without hurry. In fact, it suits them to take their time. Why? Because the Ukrainians need to claim that Prokros hasn't fallen yet, and they're making desperate attempts to break the siege of Prokros and, in this case, Minograd, because Prokros is already more than taken. That means they're concentrating a lot of units there trying to achieve the impossible, and the Russians are delighted to have them stay there, because if they're there, they're not somewhere else. And we're back to the same point again, even if it sounds repetitive.
Y volvemos otra vez a lo mismo, aunque sea pesado. Es decir, muchas de las unidades que están.
That is, many of the units that are now in Prokros trying to break this siege were in Zaporizhia. In other words, what the Russians have taken advantage of to make this tremendous advance from Zaporizhia, to break the front, to destroy that entire sector, and for that sector to be collapsing at a dizzying speed. Well, since Syrskyi and Zelensky have to keep stubbornly selling the idea that Prokros hasn't fallen, or that there's still something there, they keep gathering forces to attempt the impossible, in counterattacks that only wear them down. For example, here a little further north, but just a little. I mean, I can never remember now, Rodinsky or something like that. What's this place called here?
Rodinsky, yes.
Rodinsky, here. Well, they made a push here to try to break through from that point, and then move south to break the encirclement. In the end, they managed to get in again, take a small central part of the city, but once again the Russians are retaking the area the Ukrainians had recaptured. And in the end, what we have is the Ukrainian troops wearing themselves out for nothing, when what you absolutely can't afford is to lose personnel, because you don't have any to spare. That's just how it is. There's no more to give. Well, as I said, a disaster, a total disaster.
Un desastre, pero total. Esto, ya digo, no tienen ninguna prisa los ucranianos.
This, as I said, is not urgent for the Ukrainians, because the longer it takes, the Russians, the longer the Ukrainians will have to stay there trying to do things and concentrating units for nothing. Well, it's politics and propaganda that prevail. They have to keep selling the idea that Ukraine is not defeated. Fine, but reality, as always, prevails. And indeed, Ukraine is defeated. That is, it is being defeated and will be defeated, because there is no other option. It's something that, as I said, many of the bright minds in NATO still don't seem to get. They just don't get it. Anyway, and then we get to the big part. The big part, this really is the main course.
A la parte gorda, esto sí que es plato fuerte. Es decir, ya entramos en...
Main course, that is, we're already getting into... Well, I should mention a small note I almost forgot. Here in Prokrovsk, let's see, here in Udazne, yes. Well, in Udazne, this area that's in gray, around here, I don't know how many, I mean, you have to pronounce it more or less like that because, well, something like that. But anyway, please. So, well, they already control part of the city, or the town. This isn't really a city, it's a village, really, or the town at best. Which means, this is already Dnipro. In other words, this is no longer where it used to be. This is now Dnipro. And watch out, because, and we'll see it, from here on, following the famous T-0406, they're going to advance very quickly.
Pues van a avanzar muy rápidamente. En cuanto ya terminen con el tema de Prokrovsk,
Once they finish with the Pokrovsk issue, Meshova, a logistical hub we've talked about many times, a key one, they'll reach Meshova in no time. That is extremely fast. And another bloodletting because, as I said, there's nothing left here, nothing to hold on to. No major fortifications, no front line, not enough units to maintain this. In other words, they can concentrate on one city, 2 or 3 towns, a few villages, but not much more. And the Russians' numerical superiority here prevails, just like their superiority in drones. Let's not forget, the Russians already have many more combat drones on the front line, with a range between 10 and 30 kilometers. They have everything they want. We can see it here, one of those quadcopters.
Yes, this is Ukrainian, and from this, the confirmation of the Russian advance.
Coming in through there. Look at all that fog. Yeah, I mean, this is causing, and this favors, depending on the situation, but it benefits some more than others. I think it benefits the Russians more. But anyway, when there's this kind of fog, that's when drones don't fly, or fly very little because visibility is so low. And so, well, you end up there with the vehicle you want to attack, etc. Otherwise, it's very complicated. Under these weather conditions, drone effectiveness is lower, they fly less, and that's normal. And well, now we're getting right into this mess. What do we have here? This is key. Here it is. No, I mean here. This, where the drone is in blue there. Novopolika. Novopolika. This is practically almost taken.
In fact, all this is from the last 2 days, Fernando. Pay attention to the map from 2 days ago.
Nothing.
Well, the further back you go, the fewer progress reports there are, until suddenly, boom. Yes, after that, more and more reports of grey, entry, and it's already taken at least half for sure, and the takeover of practically everything has been reported.
Another new encirclement, in this case of lesser importance. If we look at the gray area and the red area, and this part that was just taken, another small pocket, there it is. And what's happening? Well, right now the latest news is that the Ukrainians are pulling out of here, logically to avoid being crushed. Soon we'll see that this whole area will be in red. We'll see it tomorrow, the day after, in any case sometime this coming week. This was crucial because this city was a key barrier, a basic fortification, which now once taken will allow an advance to the north, to the west, and let's not forget to, Mezova, but from the south. And this right now is a hard blow, because this position had been holding for a long time. The Ukrainians had been holding out here for quite a while, and well, right now they're overwhelmed throughout the Dnipropetrovsk area. And Zaporizhzhia, the further south we go, the worse it gets. Same here, Ivanivka, which was taken at the time. There's a river here, I can't remember which one. They're already on the other side. All this is already Dnipropetrovsk. We're already in another province, another oblast. And from here, Kamyanka, that's the name of the river. Kamyanka. So from here, what do we have? Well, just a bit further down is this area there, Orikiv. Well then Velika Mikhailivka, or something like that. It must be said that all this, everything we see here, this darker area, is a forest. Well, everything between the forest and Velika Mikhailivka has already been taken by the Russians. I saw this afternoon. This one's already taken. That is to say this. And the next one. Let's see. It must be said that this city they took this week. What's it called?
Orestopil.
Orestopil. In fact, Orestopil and Novohelivka are in quotes the same city, although not administratively. What separates them is a river, but nothing more. Therefore, the assault on this area will be immediate, and another fall will make the Russian advance even easier, if that's even possible. And now we're heading toward the...
Yes, just as a reference for the modelers. All these cities marked in yellow, even Novopavlivka until recently, basically represent nodes of the Ukrainian defense. There are fortified towns there that, when connected, form a line of resistance, and we're witnessing them fall one after another. Novopavlivka is practically fully taken already, and this one here is now completely surrounded. Velika Mikhailivka and these up here are also on the verge of being captured.
Of course, because they lack two fundamental things. They don't have fortifications. The farther west we go, the fewer fortifications there are, and at some point there's practically nothing. And second, they don't have troops. In other words, it's a perfect storm. All right, there's no way around it. This is allowing for very rapid advances. If on top of that, the only thing that more or less held back, thanks to time, practically throughout this entire year, the advance of the Russians was the Ukrainian drone wall. In these areas where they don't have troops, and therefore don't have drone operator units either, well, they have fewer drones here. In other words, things are bad, so bad they can't get any worse. Meanwhile, the Russians do have enough drone operator units to distribute them along the entire front line without any problem. So right now, they're also concentrating troops here, seeing the disaster, while the Ukrainians are doing nothing. That is, they're watching a crucial sector collapse, a breach opening in the Titanic, in the huge ship, water pouring in everywhere, and there's no reaction. They keep trying to hold Kupiansk, trying to hold Pokrovsk, which no longer makes any sense. And yet in the end they say, no, yes, but we managed to keep a little piece of Kramatorsk or Mirnorod. Sure, but you've lost the rest of Ukraine. What good is that? It's something spectacular.
Fernando, by the way, we wanted to show when we were presenting Pop Crops the footage of the Russian soldiers entering. Here they are, arriving in those Mad Max-style cars, on motorcycles, in trucks, and on foot.
It must be said, after an in-depth investigation that Ezequiel Bistoletti and I carried out, which took us a great deal of time, we were able to, well, if we're wrong, determine that these images are fake.
Yes.
And we've been able to recover the real footage, which is a scoop, a world exclusive. This is the actual entry of Russian troops into Pop Crops, not the one altered by artificial intelligence that we just saw.
Uncut, raw.
The real one. Stay tuned.
Leaving aside the similarities, it's crystal clear. Pay attention to the music here, the ogres back there. Yes, that too, typical. The new Russian weapons.
Las nuevas armas de los rusos. Esto es una primicia. Estas armas no se habían mostrado nunca.
This is a scoop. These weapons had never ever been shown before, right? This, huh? And now we're going to see the new aviation. Well, it's not really aviation, you can clearly see that, right? This has been the real breakthrough in Pop Crops. It cost us an arm and a leg to get these images.
But anyway.
Indeed. Anyway, I hope they don't give the Russians from Koperich any trouble over the Star Wars thing. But well, anyway. But well, now we're really getting into it, into the big mess the Ukrainians are in, because here it's just total chaos, the end of it all. And indeed, this advance a week and a half, 2 weeks ago at most, no, not even that, I think, we were still talking about the early capture of Doch as the last part of a defensive line. The same thing, on a greater or lesser scale, is happening all over Donetsk. Since it's a globalized area and generally built around rivers, cities and towns are developed that form an artificial defensive line. Then what I'm showing there are fortifications. November 6th, Fernando on the map now.
This is November 6th, and besides, yes, November 6th. I knew this before, every day.
Every day on November 6th, the Pinista is taken and the advance immediately continues. The advance continues, and right now this one here has already been taken. Well, this BSL is almost taken. Almost taken. From what I've been able to see lately.
Here, if I remember correctly, a new video.
Yeah, as always. Yeah, this is same thing taken. Damn, what a retirement they've given him.
This is a fab. Yes, many fabs, yes.
The first move is always, or the first attack, always with fab. Then, heavy drones, afterward lighter drones, quadcopters, and finally, the advance.
Same here. Look how they attack even leaks, everything. I mean, it's just incredible. You can't move at all. Last Friday I posted a video I had lying around, one they had seen, showing a drone. Here the Russians celebrating victory because they've taken one of these villages. I mean, well, one of those drones was sitting still on the ground, waiting for its prey, and it spots a car with soldiers, but then it sees an armored vehicle coming behind it. And immediately, instead of going for the car, it heads straight for the armored vehicle, on the move. I mean, it's just incredible.
This thing with drones, parked by the side of the road, is becoming more and more common, because that way the drone stays hidden and doesn't use up its battery. And then when a little car suddenly goes by, it takes off and goes after it. God.
And they go for it. And this is impossible to detect because on top of that, the vehicles trying to avoid the drones go at full speed, so they can't see anything. Well, that image is very good because we've seen this, we're seeing it, and we'll keep seeing it. This grid-like structure, which uses streets as if it were a chessboard, is partly due to how the fields are triangulated. You can see it clearly here, how the grids of the different fields appear. Well, this sometimes leads to rather odd advances, like one here where you could see them moving along a line of trees that mark the edges of the farmland, and then when they reached the village, they took it. So you'd see a large area taken, connected to the part they already held. If I remember correctly, yes, that's right. That is, until they eventually take the rest. Well, I can see that it's taken, all of this. Of course, you'd see a line there and think, that's strange. It makes sense once you look at the geography of the area. Well, of all of Ukraine, really. Well, so this is pretty much the latest on the matter, and I was reading on Syriac. I never quite remember how it's said. I mean, it's a Syriac map. I always say it wrong, one of those things you learn wrong the first time and then can't fix. Anyway, it tends to be conservative in the good sense of the word. I mean, until they've double-checked everything with geolocations, several testimonies, images, and so on, they don't add it to the map. And I was just telling you that this last one here can be seen very clearly. Do you see this line, more or less, of yellow fortifications between the red zone north of Guliai Pole? I'm not sure if you can see it here. Do you see it there? This one, right here. These fortifications are the last defensive line. There it is. Ezekiel Bistoletti shows it perfectly, the last defensive line of Guliai Pole. Well, he was saying that it had already been broken, that it had already been taken. This is from this afternoon, I mean from a couple of hours ago. So, what do we have? That the assault on Guliai Pole itself is going to start next week. Because look at how things stand.
Next week starts tomorrow, Fernando Moragón, on Monday already.
Yes, well, I don't even know anymore. We're still not there. Really. we're still not there. Tomorrow, next week, Sunday, Monday, I'm losing my mind. But the next to last thing, this one, we really have to take with caution, because it hasn't been confirmed, but well, where there's smoke, there's fire. So it's precisely that, a bit further north. Notice here that you'll see Guliai Pole if we keep going north. Here's the road that runs along a river where there are a number of towns. And if we keep going up, we reach the point where the road has been cut off there. Well, in this stretch, further up is Pokrovsk, which is a very important hub, as we've said many times, logistically for the Ukrainians, not to be confused with Pokrovsk, which we talked about earlier. Well, here, this road that used to connect Pokrovsk with Guliai is cut off, and this area in gray is already in Russian hands. But the second to last update along that line that goes down from here, from this area, the second to last thing about it is that, let me see, I have it here, so I don't get it wrong. Things are happening one after another, it's incredible. Let's see, this was taken, I'm looking for it right now, because they're already talking about one of the, here it is, around the area of, let me see, I'm sticking my head in here because otherwise I can't see it. Barvanitsia, more or less. That is, this is in Guliai. If we follow the road, the next place is Telene. Then there's a village called Oleno-Konstantinivka and Baryakivka. Well, there, in that area, though not yet confirmed, they say the Russians were already assaulting it.
That is to say, another one of the movements.
Right around this area. And again, we're seeing, look, the same maneuver. That is, they're going to cut it off, besides the fact that they've already cut the road far to the north. But now, for the encirclement, they'll take this part. In other words, they're indeed continuing to advance on Guliai Pole. From the south, they'll also apply pressure. And once again, we have the same pattern, the pocket formation, leaving only one part accessible for Ukrainian logistics toward the west. So there it is, always, and here to the south of Guliai Pole indeed. This typical Russian maneuver, where they keep closing in, until in the end it's like in Pokrovsk, where there's barely a small opening of 1 or 2 kilometers, and well, Guliai Pole will fall. That is to say, from the fall of Guliai Pole onward, it's chaos. I mean, absolute chaos. Absolute chaos, because from this point on, there's nothing left. This is already the void, the ether. Let's put it this way. This is nothing now. Just look at how things are. Seeing the Russians coming, the Ukrainians are reinforcing Orehove as much as they can, because they already see that they'll have to use it like Numantia, meaning in a Numantine way, holding out. But this city we see, stretching in red toward Orehove, that's just been taken, the outermost part.
Indeed.
Well, this city that was partially, yes, well, Pantumaka, that's what it sounds like. But anyway, this city that was halfway taken has now been conquered by the Russians, and look how close it already is to Orehove. If we move toward the Dnipro, on the Dnipro, after quite a fierce battle, the next to last thing, here we have it, is that this Povitsir, well, here if you look, there's kind of a gray U shape. Well, this is a confirmed Russian advance. Again, the same thing, encircling the center of the city. We're going to see this repeated 250,000 times. That is to say, this one is also about to fall. And they keep advancing. This would be the reservoir on the same Dnipro River, and here they're moving little by little toward the north, which means that at a certain point, that advance will merge, like a hurricane coming from the east, that will directly affect the collapse, well, it's already affecting it, the complete collapse of this area of the front, where there are already protests, clashes among the Ukrainian regime's own politicians, throwing, let's say, stones at each other, blaming one another for the disaster. And well, the situation is critical, truly critical, because as I said, from here on it's over, there's nothing more. That is, the last line, taking advantage of a river, in this case also a defensive one, is the one we've marked from Juliapol northward. And that's it. There's nothing more. And besides, as we've said many times, the Ukrainians are being attacked from the rear. This is a disaster. You can clearly see there the area of Zaporizhia, and notice that it's not just that they're moving in to attack Zaporizhia from the rear, but that the advance along the Dnipro is going to surpass even the administrative border between Zaporizhia and Dnipro, and that advance, like a hurricane, will also reach Dnipro. A disaster. And to this we must add, we'll look at the data in a moment, the catastrophic situation Ukraine is facing from an energy standpoint. And it's not that we're saying it or that Putin is saying it. For example, I don't know if you have it there or if you've already mentioned it, but the latest or second to latest thing reported by the Western press. For instance, I have here, let's see. Wait. Here it was. That fool Stubb. The fool Stubb is the president of Finland. Here, the New York Times. What does the New York Times tell us? Well, the New York Times is telling us that this is a disaster. The New York Times, huh? Russia is trying to cut off power to Ukraine, or energy to Ukraine. Now they're going to be left without heat. And I'll roughly tell you what the New York Times says, the most important part. The New York Times reports on the rapid deterioration of the situation in Ukraine's energy sector. According to the publication, Naftogaz, the state-owned company that manages everything related to gas, lost up to 60% of its production capacity in October, mind you, in October, as a result of Russian attacks. For Ukraine, where gas provides heating and covers basic needs for 80% of households, and this needs to be explained. Look, having belonged to the Soviet Union, and with so much gas in the Soviet Union, and later Russia also has gas in Ukraine. Not as much, but still some. That is, almost everything runs on gas because it used to cost nothing. It was practically free. Well, 80% of Ukrainian households depend on gas for heating, and sometimes even for electricity, depending on what they have. And according to, as I said, the New York Times, 60% of gas production capacity has disappeared. This is terrible.
Fernando, as proof of this situation, the report by Julian Röpke himself, the military specialist from Bild, Germany's highest circulation newspaper, the most widely read, and also part of a news group with a TV channel and website, today, or yesterday, presented a long analysis of the situation. Very, very, very negative. Would you like to present it, Fernando, maybe, if I'm not mistaken?
My German isn't good, huh? I'm telling you.
But you, with the text in Spanish, well, we can, yeah.
Well, let me add one more fact. That is, look at what the New York Times reports. They say, if the attacks continue, millions of people will have trouble keeping their homes warm. The transition to electric heaters is impossible because there's no electricity. The Ukrainian power grid can't handle the load. Regular blackouts lasting between 8 and 16 hours show that their safety margin is exhausted. In other words, they haven't just destroyed it. You see here the brilliance of Zelensky and the Westerners. Why have the Russians been able to attack the entire gas system of Naftogaz, the Ukrainian company? Well, because Zelensky got angry with Viktor Orban, Fico and company, and decided he would no longer send them gas. Since he stopped sending them gas, the Russians can now bomb the facilities without any problem because they're not harming, let's say, the gas that used to flow through pipelines to countries like Slovakia or Hungary. That's the brilliance of it. In other words, he's made it possible for the Russians to attack what they couldn't before, because it would have harmed the people within the European Union who are supporting him.
Yes. Here's the analysis by Julian Röpke, Fernando Castellano. Attention. This man, once again, a German pro-Ukrainian propagandist to the core. More Satanist, more Russophobic than this man. No one. And even so, these are his words. Pay attention. In recent weeks, I have published few strategic analyses. One of the reasons is the dynamic and constantly deteriorating situation of the Ukrainian armed forces in the southeast of the country, as well as in the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. However, the situation can no longer be concealed through public relations campaigns by the Ukrainian General Staff, nor by the attempts of the Kiev government to minimize or ignore it. Ukraine is heading toward a strategic defeat against the invading Russian forces. Ukrainian journalists and activists have acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. Even so, neither the Ukrainian army nor its Western partners are learning from their past mistakes in the war against Russia. More than 2,000 tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored vehicles delivered have proven practically useless in the face of Russia's growing dominance in fiber-optic systems, drones, and other unmanned technologies. Well, instead of supporting Ukraine with so-called modern weapons of mass destruction, that is, millions of FPV drones, as well as thousands of high-performance cruise missiles for low-altitude strikes, Western nations continue to limit themselves to sporadic aid and investments in strategically overvalued, long-range Ukrainian drones. The Ukrainian government also seems to take the war of annihilation against its country only partially seriously. The real whereabouts of the supposed 17,000 men mobilized each time remain a mystery to most observers and soldiers at the front. Desertions and temporary absences from service, which often leave entire brigades existing only on paper, go virtually unpunished. This not only leads to miscalculations about the strength and resilience of their own troops, but also to huge gaps along the front, and consequently, new Russian advances. As a result, the area controlled by Ukraine shrank by another 586 square kilometers in October, and a new annual record of territorial losses is likely to be reached in November. This means that a monthly loss equivalent to the size of the German state of Berlin is practically imminent. The Russian offensives in the regions surrounding the major cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia will continue for months, at most between 1 and 2 years. The truth is that unless the government in Kiev or its Western partners initiate an immediate strategic shift, Russia will win this war little by little. A terrifying prospect, with devastating geopolitical consequences for the entire world. Fernando, starting tomorrow, Julian Rob begins his program on DMP geopolitics. All the things said here. How long, Fernando? Taken literally by this gentleman, just as they are.
Let's see, we've been saying this, and I don't even remember, practically since the beginning of the war. There are things that are obvious and can be debated. Obviously, no one foresaw a military and technological development like the one we're seeing, just as it happened in World War I. Everyone thought it would go one way, and then it went another. That's normal. But the fact that there was any doubt, or that this guy and the NATO supporters, the NATOists, thought they could defeat Russia, is madness. First, because it's a nuclear power, and nuclear powers, in matters like this, do not allow themselves to be defeated. But the ignorance about Russia, first they believed their own stories about the Russian economy. Then the IMF came out saying, well, the truth is that Russia is the 4th largest economy in the world, ahead of Germany. But let's remember, they thought Russia was little more than a third world country with a lot of oil. That's what, I don't remember who said it. I mean, you can't be heard.
A gas station country. That's how it was described, if I remember correctly. Von der Leyen, or one of those. Von der Leyen, yes, yes.
Well, these are obvious things. So the industrial capacity that Russia has, even technologically and very advanced in many sectors, such as nuclear energy, we've already seen it. Right now, the country at the technological forefront of civilian nuclear energy is Russia, which exports nuclear power plants left and right and builds them all over the world. Moreover, with new designs for modular small-scale nuclear plants and so on. And we've seen that it even has the capability to place small nuclear reactors in a missile, like the Burevestnik. So that's it. They wanted to make it look as if that place was practically in the Neolithic era, but with a lot of oil.
Pintar que aquello era poco menos que estaba en el Neolítico, pero con mucho petróleo. Pues no, es decir, esto nunca ha sido así. Pero fíjate.
Well, no, I mean, it's never been like that. But look at the figure Reuters gives, which, as everyone knows, is also very pro-Russian. Reuters always has been. Well, quoting Reuters, it says, according to statements from the Directorate of Military Intelligence, the GUR, the following. It claims that Russia will produce, by the end of this year, 120,000 glide bombs. That is, counting everything so far this year plus what's left of the month and a half, it will total 120,000 glide bombs. That's insane. According to them, the Ukrainians, the Russians, are currently dropping between 200 and 250 glide bombs daily. Wow. And with things like this, you keep seeing, and there comes a point when you say, what world are these people living in? Well, there we have it. By the way, since we're on the topic of gas, just to illustrate what I mean when I say that Europe has no future, that Europe's collapse is inevitable and so on, here's a very interesting little chart showing a projection of gas consumption growth from 2025 to 2030 over 5 years. In North America, there's a 4% increase. In Asia Pacific, 19%. In the Middle East, 16%. In what they call Eurasia, basically the former Soviet countries to be clear, 6%. In Africa, 12%. And even in South and Central America, 5%. Now guess which part of the world, which continent, not only doesn't grow, but actually declines.
And possibly the continent where you and I appear right now, my dear.
Indeed, Europe is shrinking by 11%. In other words, everyone else is consuming more gas because there's demand. Here we're going to consume less because we don't have any, and there won't be any demand, as a result of the deindustrialization we ourselves are carrying out. So, great. Because of course, since we've gotten rid of Russian gas, now there's no gas. Anyway, as you can see, the situation is not just critical, it's beyond that. And I was looking into it because the issue of de-electrification is also brutal. That is to say, right now, especially in the eastern part, east of the Dnipro, they're hitting Kiev hard. In Kiev right now, Ukrenergo, the official Ukrainian electricity agency, is already saying that the city can't hold on, that 2.5 million people will have to flee because there won't be enough electrical capacity. In other words, they can't keep up. Now, there's this guy, it really makes me laugh. It's just a way of speaking. I mention it because they no longer know what to say or do. I was talking about it last Friday. None other than the head of Ukrenergo, who has to show his face from time to time. And of course, he's having a rough time. This man, a week ago, had already come out saying that, well, things are bad and all that, but that, you know, if you put on sweaters, you can keep warm.
Yes, indeed.
And he's come out again. No, I mean, that guy came out again saying no more and no less, that, well, things are bad and all that. The guy says, I can't guarantee that the situation will improve at all in the coming days. So basically, it's not going to get better. And then he says we won't disconnect consumers, meaning we will disconnect them. We'd be forced to do it, but well, in the next few weeks, we'll start supplying energy again somehow. He's saying this with a face that doesn't look very convinced. I'm watching him here, and he doesn't look like he believes it much, that thing about fixing it in a few weeks. Let's not forget what we were talking about. I think it was last week. I can't even remember now. I mean, the thing about the water pipes. I think you were the one who mentioned it.
The freezing of the water pipes. We're going to take a break before presenting the end of this broadcast with a reminder and an invitation, because here in the city of Berlin, this Tuesday marks the start of the Colombian Film Festival, known as La Surreal Colombia. The organizers, with great kindness, sent not only this beautiful poster. Let's see, Fernando, I'll set aside for a second this beautiful poster with, well, the cover of one of the films. But now, Fernando, not only that, they also sent, as a courtesy, 2 tickets for the Demolishers.
Para los demoledores y las demoledoras, en realidad una entrada para una persona y su acompañante.
Actually, it's a ticket for one person and their companion. So, well, it's up to you. To the first one, the first demolisher who sends a text message, obviously, for people who live here in the city of Berlin. Some of you out there, surely. Well, if someone wants to travel from thousands of kilometers away, that's fine too, they can. But among the 3,000 demolishers connected, if anyone sends a message to our channel's email address, the first demolisher to contact us will be the winner of those 2 tickets for this festival at the Babylon Cinema, located in the center of Berlin. The festival runs from Tuesday to Sunday, but those tickets are for the opening on Tuesday the 18th. So whoever wants them, just send a little message to our email inbox, and then, by email, we'll send the ticket with the code for use on Tuesday. That said, and to wrap up, well, many thanks to the organizers for this.
Me, because I'm not in Berlin. Otherwise, come on, I'd pull some strings, no raffles or any of that nonsense. No, just give it to me.
Ah, well, with a little ticket I also received, but that one I'm keeping to myself, dear Fernando.
Me, with the Zelenskys, if one gets corrupted, then everyone has to get corrupted. I mean...
Sure, I mean yes, not as much as Zelensky, but yes, the principle is the same. A few little things. Yes, where do we start? With Ukraine? Or with the adventures of a lion in Ukraine? Or the adventures of a Russian woman in Buenos Aires? Fernando, toward the end of this broadcast.
There goes the Russian woman in Buenos Aires.
Well, pay attention to these images.
Because 2 things I really like come together. Buenos Aires and the Russian woman. I mean, sorry.
Come on, that's it. Still waiting for your visit to Buenos Aires at some point. Here's a demonstration of the courage and strength of the Russians. These are the images released today, or maybe yesterday, I don't remember exactly, because suddenly they don't show up here where they should. With patience, relentless men and women. Oh, how silly of me. I've got a downloaded image here. So silly, an image and not the video. Well, the live one. 1 second of patience. Here we go, now yes.
Meanwhile, back in the day, in the time of Maria Castaña, when I was a kid and TV was a bore around here, when the broadcast would cut off. And now, while we wait, we'll play one of those musical minutes. They'd show a video of someone singing. I could do the same, but I'm afraid the audience would plummet if I started singing.
Well, Fernando, your shots today. I even saw the hairs in your nose, more or less, at one point.
Ah, yes, because when I stick my big head in, yes, exactly.
Some shots, yes. Spectacular, yes, come on. Cinematic, yes. Italian cinema from the golden decade, yes. Mastroianni's got nothing on you. Well, here are these images from the city of Buenos Aires. Right now, in Buenos Aires, in fact, I saw it myself on my last visit, just a week ago. There are many Russians and many Ukrainians who have arrived because of the war. Here, a girl in front of a traffic light, waiting for it to change, on what they call the Bistoletti. That's what they call the bike lane there. A Russian girl on her bicycle. and now appear what in Argentina we call two motochoros, or two thieves on a motorcycle. Watch the girl, huh? They're after her bag there. And the girl, pay attention to her courage and strength. She's hanging on to one of them, knocking him down, holding him still. She doesn't let go. She doesn't let go until a young man arrives. And after a moment, this is in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. If you suddenly spot a thief, everyone around helps you. Until the guy is pinned down, first by passers-by, and then caught by the police. How about that Russian girl, huh, Fernando?
¿Qué tal esta chica rusa, Fernando?
Así se entiende perfectamente.
It's perfectly clear why the Russians are winning, and it's perfectly clear why if we Europeans fought with the Russians or against the Russians, we would lose. If they do this, just imagine holding out until the end, and you wouldn't leave. Not a chance. Exactly.
Yes, the difference lies in the reaction of the passers-by. Immediately, 5, 6, 7 people come to help. Here in Berlin, you could be getting shot at in the street or stabbed in broad daylight, and people just walk by as if nothing's happening, ignoring you.
And an increasingly worrying trend is that something happens, whatever it is. You get robbed, a building collapses and crushes 30 people, and instead of helping, people pull out their phones and start filming. It's something that, well, help me, or hand your phone to the person next to you and help. But at that moment, everyone's filming like crazy, recording there. Well, anyway.
Una cosa tremenda. Bueno, y la otra.
Well, and the other thing, a loose lion in Ukraine, literally. Why was this lion released? A lion? Seriously? These are the images captured by a home security camera. Attention, walking down the street, if not killed by a Russian bomb, eaten by a lion.
I imagine it must have escaped from a zoo, because for someone to have it as a pet, come on.
Incredible image of the creature walking. Yes. Well, yes, apparently they escaped from a zoo, both this lion and a lioness around here, poor thing, found on the street.
Moreover, he's deceiving himself.
Yes, but poor thing, the lioness's face there, scared. They found her somewhere, in a house. Yeah, but they're kittens, aren't they? You're not saying, let's see how they get her out. Still, Fernando, compared to the evil of human beings.
Yeah. I mean, what I mean is that it's normal for her to be scared and hungry. 2 good reasons for her to bite you.
Yes, that's true.
So, well, anyway.
We're not going to present it today, because in a little while Santiago Martinez will start his show for tonight, his broadcast for tonight, which is super interesting. Precisely about the corruption case in Ukraine. The golden toilet, the golden commode, or the golden loo, whatever you want to call it.
That's something that really baffles me because, I mean, I get it. It's about luxury and all that. Like, I don't know, you make yourself a gold statue, but what kind of pleasure do these people get from putting a gold toilet in a bathroom? I just don't get it. I mean, it must feel the same as using a regular one. Anyway, I don't know. I'd have other things made of gold, but if we're going to be ridiculous, I mean, things like that. But, well, very interesting. We'll leave for the next show a long and detailed discussion about Einstein, which is the other big topic of the week.
The other topic, the fight. I've been looking into things from a recent interview with Taylor Greene, until recently Trump's #1 ally, now his #1 enemy, about the reason for this internal dispute and her confession, basically related to the Epstein issue. But anyway, we'll present that next time. Fernando, my friend, thank you so much, as always, to the Demolishers, both male and female. Thanks for joining us. In 3 minutes, Santiago Martinez begins. In the coming days, until Wednesday's talk, on Monday and Tuesday, we'll be posting things done throughout the week on other programs. We'll present those appearances there on the channel. So there will also be new content for tomorrow and the day after on the channel. And from Wednesday onward, as always, live with the usual programming. Fernando, my friend, a big hug from here.
Igualmente, hasta luego.
Likewise, see you later.